morning, everybody. I'm pleased to welcome today Clay, who is the Health and Safety Manager for Quoni, and Clay will share with us some interesting insight on health and safety. This video is part of a project that IUCN and Quoni are implementing in building business skills for ecotourism operations, and the aim is to enable conservation organizations to become better business managers.
Thank you very much, Julia. As Julia said, my name's Clay States. I'm the Health and Safety Manager for GTA with Quoni. And I have been with GTA for the last 6 years, looking after the health and safety of the hotels and the products that we offer to our clients worldwide. Before that, I used to live in North Africa in the Middle East, investigating food poisonings and accidents for travel companies and tour operators. So I've had a lot of time and experience working with large multinational companies and hotels and smaller run operations as well. And what I'd like to bring to you for the next 20-30 minutes is just some of those experiences and those understandings to try and help you understand why health and safety is important to your business and to follow it through. So first of all, what are the perceived barriers of health and safety? Quite often people say to me health and safety is too expensive. It's not easy to understand. There's too much legislation around it, and if you work in more than one district or one country, then it's all totally different. And also they see health and safety as, if you like, the fun police. So we come along and we say, you can't do this and you can't do that. For no reason really, and it's a stopping or putting barriers in place where you're trying to, one, have customers enjoy themselves, and two, try and make money and be a business. And what I want to try and impart upon you is health and safety isn't that at all. It's not a barrier, it's an enabler for you to carry on and improve your business and improve the market that you sell to. The three main reasons for health and safety to be implemented are moral, financial and legal. And if we just go through those three one at a time. First of all, the moral reason. Do we really want to be seen as a pirate company who don't care about our staff and don't care about our customers? Very soon we'll have a bad reputation and clients won't come to us. Do we want to be seen as a company who really doesn't care about the operation that goes on? And surely, as an employer, we have a moral obligation to our staff and our customers to make sure that the product is safe. No matter how enjoyable it is, jumping off a cliff without a rope or without a parachute only enjoys so much fun before you hit the bottom. So you need to put some controls in place so that you can enjoy that activity more and more, and make sure that others enjoy the activity and take it away and tell others how good it was. From a legal aspect, I've already mentioned there's lots of legislation in place, lots of rules and regulations, and they can be very confusing. The simple thing to remember is wherever you are in the world, you should be checking that what you're doing is safe for your staff and your customers, and you should be checking that regularly through training, through equipment checks, through whatever checks you have to have in place. And that's the bare minimum, the legislation. Whatever the rules say, whatever you have to write down, whatever forms you have to fill in, that's the basic. And thirdly, the financial reasons. These are quite often the misunderstood reasons. Everyone thinks financial is loss of reputation. It's the fines that are in place when you get fined for doing something wrong by the local government or by the council. And these are true, but the main reason financial reasons are there is that health and safety can make you money. Health and safety can improve your marketing. There are a growing number of companies around the world, especially in the Western world, in Europe and in Australia, where these clients, these customers will ask what you do for health and safety before they even work with you. So if you want to have this business, you have to have this health and safety in place. And if you want to improve your business and increase your sales and increase your marketing potential, then putting basic health and safety standards in place are a bare minimum and a must. And they will make you money rather than cost you money. So where do we start with health and safety? It's a minefield sometimes. It's very hard to understand where to start. And quite often businesses around the world have spent hundreds of thousands or thousands of pounds paying for very expensive consultants to come out and tell you where to start, where you shouldn't start, when really it's very basic. The key things to bear in mind are that you need to reduce the risk without ruining the activity. So you can still go bungee jumping, but just make sure that the customers are trained, they're given a safety briefing. Just make sure that your staff are trained on a regular basis, and please make sure that the equipment is checked every day at the start of the day. So it doesn't get rid of the activity. All you're doing is putting some checks in place to make sure the activity is as safe as possible. The customer makes the decision whether they want to take those risks or not, but you need to educate them so that they understand what the risks are and what they're doing. And this is how you can save yourself as a business, as it's a protection, but also you can make money by doing this because it encourages more customers to come and encourages more companies to work with you if you care about your clients in this way. How we can ensure that if the worst does happen, that we can minimise the damage and minimise the risk. So if you're operating in the middle of the jungle and someone needs hospital treatment, what's the easiest way to get them to the hospital? Or is it not possible to get them to the hospital in a speedy way? In which case your staff are going to need medical training and they're going to need to take basic medical supplies. You should have thought these processes through. You need to have thought what happens if this goes wrong, what happens if this goes wrong. So if you're working in a hurricane belt, what happens if a hurricane's coming? How do you operate, or do you stop operating? These things need to be considered, and these things need to be written down and trained to your staff and things put in place to make sure that you've covered every eventuality. And those are the two basics. So to reduce risk, we need to understand where risk comes from. Every individual operation will have different risks, different inherent risks, and different less obvious risks in place. But some of the more obvious risks that every operation come into contact with. Slips, trips and falls, and this is the most common type of accident that happens around the world. Whether it's tripping over a cable, whether it's tripping over a tree trunk, or whether it's falling off a rock as you're jumping across a river. All these accidents are classed under slips, trips and falls. Your water and food supply, where does it come from? And is it secure? Or are you getting water from a well? No, that's not checked. Think about when you think about health and safety, and that's fire. If you're operating in a building, if you're a hotel operation, or if you operate out of any kind of structure, then there should be fire controls and evacuation procedures in place, especially if you operate any equipment that could create a fire. So if you've got cooking stoves, or if you've got any compressed gas, any of those sort of things on the premises, then you need to consider fire controls in place. And that takes us on to gas safety. One of the incidents that occurred a couple of years ago in a hotel in Corfu was that there was a villa that had a gas boiler fitted to the side, and it was leaking, and leaking carbon monoxide. One night a family of 4 went to sleep, and unfortunately only the parents woke up in the morning and the 2 children died. When you're operating with gas, not only is it a fire and an explosion risk, but if it's in an enclosed space, you have to consider the possible leaks as well. So if you have a tent that has gas that cooks or heats water, then you need to carry out very stringent checks on a regular basis. If you use gas in an open area for cooking or for other operations, then you need to contain it properly so that there isn't any risk of explosion or fire. If you're operating with water, then drowning is an obvious risk, and this can be easily covered with life belts and training with your staff to make sure that they're trained as rescuers, and to make sure that customers are given briefings if there are strong currents, if there are other issues very shallow or very deep, then customers should be made aware of these issues. And one of the keys is staff training, making sure that your staff understand what the risks are, but also they understand how to control those risks and how to react to those risks. Quite often things will go wrong in an operation, and one of the things that can make it from a negative to a positive is how the staff react and control it. You can have an incident that could be quite horrific, a fire, but if the staff react well, the thing that people will take away is that the staff reacted well. If the staff react badly, that's what they'll take away. people understand an accident or an incident can occur. What they can't understand is if your staff don't know how to react to it. So the key is to make sure your staff are aware of that. Motor vehicle risks, so if you operate Jeep Safaris, if you have a minibus or a coach that takes people to the operation, or bush taxis, any of this sort of operation, you need to make sure they're as safe as possible. This obviously varies from country to country, but you want to make sure that they operate at least at a minimum standard in your country. Just because you're operating away from capital cities and in jungles or in deserts doesn't limit that responsibility. You need to make sure those vehicles are safe. And if you're using third parties to bring people to your operation, that third party impacts upon the image of your operation. So if there are taxis, if there are coaches, if there are minibuses, make sure you're dealing with companies that are like-minded like yourself and that care about safety, because that's the first impression and the last impression that clients will get of your operation. And the last common one is terrain. So whether you're operating in a big city, then you have to worry about the traffic, or whether you're operating in the desert where you have to worry about the heat and the sand, terrain is a big concern or a big consideration for health and safety. So you need to think about where you're operating and how to take that into account. Okay, so looking at some examples of everyday risks, or not everyday risks, but common risks in activities in the tourism fields. We all cross the road. We all cross the road from several to hundreds of times a day. And that's a simple risk assessment. That's a simple check of whether there's any risk before we cross the road. We all look both ways before we go out. And it's as simple as that. If you look at each operation during your business and look at it from that point of view, then that's a risk assessment. If you look at rafting, going on the river, whitewater rafting is a dangerous activity, but it doesn't have to be stopped by the health and safety police. What you want to do is put life jackets on people, put helmets on them, give them a customer briefing at the start so they know what to expect, they know what to do if the raft capsizes, if they fall out, and train your staff. Make sure that they're in place so that if someone does fall out of the raft, if something does happen, they know what to do. And then you can carry on with the activity. Where you use equipment on a regular and sustained basis, on the slide it shows rock climbing, but it can be diving, scuba diving, any activity where you have equipment and you're dependent upon it. Make sure you check that equipment on a regular basis. The more dependent your life is on that equipment, the more regularly you should check. So if you're hanging from a rope, climbing up a rock face, you should check the rope every day. If it's just a backup piece of equipment, maybe once a week is fine to check it. But it should be driven by how dependent you, your customers' lives and your staff's lives are on that piece of equipment. An example of a disastrous safety check. At the end of the presentation we'll show you a video, but this is a still from it. A lady was doing a bungee jump over the Zambezi River, 110 metres up. She jumped down, and the picture shows on the slide the rope had frayed and it snapped, and she fell into a crocodile-infested river. Amazingly, she survived, and she survived with only cuts and bruises. But it's an example of what can happen if you don't check your equipment. From the video at the end, you'll see the rope is very frayed, and you'll also hear that the staff didn't know what to do. It had never happened before. Of course it had never happened before. And so they panicked her friends even more. Was there anyone at the bottom? If there was, they didn't tell her friends. They didn't tell the people waiting. They didn't say, don't worry, someone will be down there to check. Don't worry, it's very deep, so she'll survive. No one followed up with this information. And so all you had was panic and fear at the top, and the staff were making it worse. So it's a very good example of not only that you have to check your equipment on a regular basis, but also your staff need to be trained and to expect these problems. And if they've been trained to expect them, then they keep people calm, they keep people relaxed, and it's a better perception at the end. At the end of the day, if a rope snaps on a bungee jump, you're not going to be selling any more bungee jumps that day. But how you react to it is then how it goes around the world. This story went viral, went all around the world on news feeds, and is on YouTube for you to see. So I'm thinking this operator probably isn't going to have any more business. You want to be able to control that and make sure that any damage that you do cause is resolved and controlled quickly. And some examples of less obvious risk. Where does your water supply come from? If you're giving your clients water, which especially if you're in hot climates you need to be doing on a regular basis, where's that water coming from? Is it a managed source? Is it a source where you know where it's coming from, or is it well water from the ground? What I would suggest is if you don't know or understand where that water's coming from and whether it's checked, you bring in bottled water, you make sure that the water supply is safe. A lot of stomachs from around the world can't control different chemicals, can't cope with different chemicals, and it upsets them, even before you start looking at waterborne bacteria. So make sure your water supply is safe, or bring in a bottled and a safe water supply so that you can ensure that your staff and customers are kept safe. And another example of a less obvious risk is your food supply. One example I can give is from an Egyptian hotel. This Egyptian hotel had a food poisoning problem and we couldn't find out what the problem was. Finally, we saw a frozen chicken delivery being brought into the back door. When you opened the back and you actually checked the chickens, they weren't actually frozen anymore. What happened was the driver used to sit round the corner because he was early, and he used to switch the engine off to save the fuel. So all the refrigeration in the back switched off. All the chickens would defrost, bacteria would start multiplying. He'd then switch it back on, make sure it felt cold, so when he delivered the chickens to the hotels, they felt cold. They were then brought into the hotels. They didn't check the temperatures, they just trusted the delivery man that it was safe. They took them into their freezer and refroze them, and they were bringing in all that bacteria and all that problem into their hotel. And the hotel had that responsibility. The hotel was the one that ended up in court, and the hotel was the one that ended up paying the money to the clients because it made them sick. And yet, it was that delivery man and that company supplied the frozen chickens that were the problem. And by simply checking their delivery and the temperatures of their delivery, they would have picked that up. So make sure you know where your food's coming from, make sure that you know it's safe. If you don't know how it's washed, wash it in a bottled water or secured water source. Make sure it's cooked properly and make sure it's kept properly. And if you have problems with heat or problems with cold temperatures, then make sure you take those into account with your food supplies, because some foods won't react well in heat, so make sure you don't supply those to your clients. And here with this last slide of looking at less obvious risks, first of all you look at it and you look at it as a piece of scaffolding. It doesn't look particularly tidy, but it's a piece of scaffolding. And then if you look towards the back, the legs are balancing on two plastic chairs. If someone climbs on that, that will quite easily fall, quite easily not just killing or hurting the person who's climbing on it, but anyone who's underneath. People don't always engage their brains when they do these things. Make sure that you're thinking about all the processes and thinking about all the problems and check all of them through. Don't distrust third-party suppliers that you bring in to set up scaffolding or to bring your clients to the event or bring food or water. Make sure you're checking them and make sure you're checking their processes, because it's your business that they'll impact upon. It's your livelihood that they'll affect, not theirs. Records are the key, not because you have to fill in these records, but because no one will believe you're doing these checks unless they're written down. If you do training, make sure you note the training dates, make sure the staff write down and sign to say they've received that training. Because if something does happen, and if you do have to go before a court or before a lawyer, they will ask for the records. And if the records don't exist, they won't believe you. So pure and simple, you might do all this work, you might do all these checks, you might make sure it's safe, but if you don't write it down, if you don't record it, it doesn't matter. So the simplest part of the operation needs to be done, and needs to be done accurately. And if you make mistakes or if you find something bad, write it down in the records. Don't be afraid or ashamed of writing down something that hasn't worked or something that's broken, because when you're doing investigations, you're looking for those. You're looking to see that it's operated properly, because no one operates perfectly. Not one refrigerator in the world will hit every single temperature, every single day perfectly. If it does, you don't believe the records. If you write down, no, this was the wrong temperature, and then you note what happened, we sent the engineer fixed it the next day, we retested it and it's now the right temperature, then I start to believe your records. So that's the way to use them. Use them truthfully and write down if there are mistakes, if there are errors, if there are things that have gone wrong. And then people will start to use them and believe them. And some examples of records that you will use or you could use in your ecotourism operations. Staff training records, accident logs and incident logs. So if someone's been hurt, whether it's a cut finger or a broken leg, they should fill in a report so that you can learn from it, so you can make sure these things don't happen again, or you can see patterns. So if everyone cuts their finger whilst going down this, or going on this jeep, or going down this river on a raft, then you need to look at that operation. If that's a one-off, then fine. But you can use them to look at patterns, and you can use them as an investigation tool. And if something does go wrong, and you do have someone coming to investigate your operation, they will look at your records, and the more accurate they are, the more on your side these investigators are. No one's here to put you to the wall and take all your money and close your operation. What they want to know is that you're operating properly. What they want to know is that you're doing everything reasonable. And if you're doing everything reasonable and everything that can be expected, then we can understand if the unreasonable and the unexpected happens. If a guest is drunk and throws themselves off a bungee jump without attaching a rope first, if all your records and your training and your customer training is in place, then you have a lot of protection in place. If you have nothing, then people will find it very hard to believe that you actually vetted these customers and that you told them how to operate these activities. Log down the risks. So if you're operating, I don't know, a shopping trip in Barcelona, one of the risks would be crossing the roads. One of the risks would be making sure that the coach dropped the guests as close to the shopping streets as possible so they didn't have multiple roads to cross. One of the risks would be giving a customer briefing to make sure people were aware of which directions the traffic came from, whether there are trams operating, if you're in Amsterdam, for example, whether the bikes will come flying around all the corners and through the pavements, because that's not expected by a lot of customers worldwide. So it's expecting what the customers will see and giving them a briefing. And writing those down and just saying, this is what my staff tell the customers, this is what I tell my staff, this is what we do, because these are the simple risks that we've picked up in this operation. If it's a Jeep Safari, you make sure everyone puts their seatbelt on, make sure no one leans out of the windows when you're going through. Simple as that. Making sure the driver's licensed, sober, and has regular training sessions. And where you have customer briefings, note down what you tell the customers to make sure if the customer has an accident or wants to report you to someone, you can say, well, all our customers are told these things. If they choose to ignore them, it's your safety mechanism. And if you have it documented, and if your staff are trained, then people are more liable to believe you than the customer. So again, it comes back to your protection as a business and your protection and safety mechanism as a business, that the more records you keep, they can be basic, but as long as they're there and they cover all eventualities, then people will start to believe them. And the last piece of paperwork or record that you really should keep is tests of all the records or all the tests you carry out on things like water, ropes, any equipment, on rafts, on jeeps. The regular checks you carry out. If you have gas heaters, the checks you carry out on those. If you have fire alarms, the checks you carry out on fire alarms. Jeeps, the checks you carry out to make sure it's well maintained. The checks you carry out on the driver to make sure they can drive properly. If they're coach drivers, then it would be the number of hours they drive to make sure that they don't drive too many hours, they don't drive drunk, they don't drive with their talking on their mobile phones. And if it's rock climbing, then it'll be the checks you carry out every day on all your ropes and your other tackle and equipment. And if you document those checks, keep them in a simple log, and then file them away every month in your head office, then if anything does happen, you've got those records in place to show, well, I've done all the records, I've done all the tests, what more can I do reasonably? And that's what you want to be saying. So one of the keys of making sure that your operation is safe, and probably the most key thing, is staff training. I've mentioned it several times already, and I can't mention it enough. Making sure that your staff understand what's happening, understand what could happen in the event of an accident, and how to react to it is the key. In a basic operation, shopping trip, in a hotel, you would train your staff at least twice a year. In something that's high risk, then you would train them much more often. For example, an airline crew will do a safety briefing every time before they fly, going over just some of the basic points. because it's classified as a high-risk operation. And the same should happen if you're scuba diving, if you're bungee jumping. At least once a week you should be running through the safety procedures with your staff to make sure they understand the operation and what could happen if they don't do it properly and what should happen if something goes wrong. And everything we've talked about so far is a proactive measure, making sure that you're putting all these things in place. But we have reactive measures as well. If something does happen, then we need to look at the accident records, the safety records, and react to them and plan along with those to make sure that those things don't happen again. As I mentioned, if someone is taken ill, if someone gets hurt, and you're a long way from civilization, you need to make sure that there is medical procedures in, or there are medical procedures in place so that that person can get the help that they need, be it triage and help by a member of your staff, or be it having a walkie-talkie and being able to call in mountain rescue within 5-10 minutes. Whatever the procedure is, wherever you are in the world, you should have that planned and documented, and if you are using other people, local authorities or emergency services, they should understand that they're part of your procedure. Don't just assume mountain rescue or the police or the fire brigade or whoever will come and rescue you. Speak to them first and say, this is going to be part of our safety procedure. Is that okay? Is that what it should be? How do you want us to talk to you? And as soon as you've spoken to them, they'll help you plan your procedures, and it makes them a lot stronger. And one thing that a lot of people forget about, insurance, public liability insurance, and the whole topic of liability as well. Public liability insurance is something that a lot of your clients will ask for. If you're going to tour operators, travel companies, they will ask what your level of public liability insurance is. And public liability insurance basically covers everything that happens to the client, whether it's them or their equipment. If anything breaks, if anyone gets hurt, the public liability insurance covers them. It doesn't cover your premises, you have other insurance for that. But that public liability insurance should be at a high enough level to cover any eventualities. So if you're running a balloon trip, it should be higher than if you're running a shopping trip, because the chances are more injuries would occur. If a balloon crashes, then you're likely to lose all the occupants. If you're on a shopping trip, if one person gets injured, then it's one person, not the whole coachload. So you need to look at the risks and look at your liabilities and speak to your insurance company and shop around for insurances as well. A lot of insurance companies now are multinational, so they will offer insurance in lots of different countries. So don't feel bound just to work with insurance companies from your country. Have a look around and have a look what they'll offer and operate. But be honest about your operation. Don't keep things hidden, because that's a false economy. It might keep your premiums down. If an accident does happen during an activity you hadn't told them about, they're not going to pay out. So you might as well just have no insurance at all. And the other topic is liability. Quite often we don't understand what liability is. As the operator of the activity, you're liable for everything that happens during that activity. You might think, if I get them to sign a disclaimer, then I'm covered. Disclaimers won't stand up in a lot of courts. Courts don't believe them. They'll say that the guest signing it doesn't understand what they're signing, and it doesn't limit your responsibility. But also from a liability point of view, you need to understand that where the guest is travelling from is where you will be tried and caught. So if the guest is travelling from the US, if an accident happens, they will take you to court in the US. If an accident happens with a Swiss guest, it will happen in a Swiss court. So your liabilities and your actions need to take into account where your clients are coming from. If they're all just local clients, fine. Then you take into account your local courts and your local liabilities. But if you're offering to a much bigger and a much wider audience, then you need to take into account the other liabilities and activities from those other courts. So bear that in mind when you're looking at insurance policies and when you're looking at risk, that the liabilities in place are covering those eventualities from other countries and other areas of responsibility. And now to my favourite part of health and safety, using health and safety as a marketing strategy to not only make your business safe, but to bring your business money. There are hundreds and thousands of companies out there who will ask you what your health and safety procedures are, what your public liability levels are, before they will send you business. If everyone else operating in your field doesn't care about health and safety or insurance, then there's a gap in the market. Bring some insurance in. Do some basic health and safety checks. Show off about it and be honest about what you do, and you will increase your business and you will make more money. And surely that's why you're here. And thank you very much for your time. Any questions, please pass them through the IUCN or on my LinkedIn details, and I will endeavour to answer them. And most of all, enjoy your businesses and make sure they're safe and make sure they're making you money.